Published back in 1985, The Killing Joke is one of the most disturbing and frightening Batman stories ever published. I remember when I first read it, I put it down and breathed a heaving sigh and said to myself, "Whew." I immediately reread it again, and I have read it many times since. The Killing Joke graphic novel is considered by many to be the definitive Joker story, and also one of the best, if not the best, Joker story ever told. I feel that it is also one of the best Batman stories ever published as well. So naturally I was very intrigued as to what this adaptation would be like. Knowing that this animated film was being allowed an R rating, I knew that it would need to tone down on any of the scary. But oddly enough, even with an R rating, this film managed to tone it down anyways. It manages to make it less scary. I agree that in order to properly adapt The Killing Joke, the film should have an R rating. And I want to state that I have nothing against adding swearing or sex to a story. But that being said, adding swear words and sex do nothing to make it scarier. And after watching this film during a special theatrical screening, I have to say that I have real misgivings about what I have seen. Before I go any further, I want to say that everybody involved in the making of this film is extremely talented. And despite my misgivings about this adaptation, that talent does show in spades when you watch it. While the film tries to use as much of the original dialogue from the book as possible, the new dialogue for the newer scenes is tight and crisp. The voice acting is top-notch, and it's awesome to hear Kevin Conroy and Mark Hamill again as the Batman and the Joker. They even went the extra mile of having the music performed by a real orchestra. The animation is as well handled as it can be, given the budgets that the DC Universe animated films are given. The talent is definitely there, and it's obvious in every frame. Everyone involved is committed to making this as good as humanly possible. So where does it misstep? Let's start with the comic. The Killing Joke is very short by graphic novel standards, and as a straight-up adaptation, I'm guessing that it would probably run about 35 to 40 minutes, give or take. Not really long enough to call it a feature. Now, I am not going to say that making it longer is a bad idea. And I knew going into this film that it was going to be expanded on in order to make it feature length. But I think the decisions that were made in how to make it longer are its two biggest missteps. To expand on the original story, there is an additional 40-minute story added to the beginning of the film. This story involves Batman and Batgirl trying to hunt down an up-and-coming mob boss. This opening segment also explores the relationship between Batman and Batgirl, and leads up to Barbara Gordon making the decision to stop being Batgirl. This story does have Batman in it, but it is Barbara Gordon, aka Batgirl's story. The opening narrative starts with Batgirl's voice. She even addresses the audience, and more specifically the audience of fans of the Killing Joke comic, by stating, "I know this isn't how you expected this story would start." This opening story is well written, well acted, and well paced. It has great voice acting and great action scenes. It feels like a more adult version of the 90s Batman the Animated Series. And as I sat in the theater and watched it, I was completely engrossed. And for a moment, I actually forgot that I came to see an adaptation of The Killing Joke. And then this opening story ends, and it becomes an adaptation of The Killing Joke. You will notice that I have referred to the film's opening as a separate story, and that's because it is. It is told from a completely different point of view from The Killing Joke. It is exploring completely different themes, and it has its own completely different ending. If this were a monthly comic book series, you would have had a tagline on the last page stating, "Next month, guest writer Alan Moore brings us The Killing Joke." This film's opening story, which I will refer to as Barbara's story, is a completely different and separate story from The Killing Joke, written by an entirely different writer with a completely different storytelling agenda. Barbara's story is enjoyable as a standalone film, but it is in complete juxtaposition to what follows. Barbara's story is a gritty action crime drama. The Killing Joke is a psychological horror story. On its own, it's fine, but it adds nothing to The Killing Joke. So why add it to the beginning? There are a number of reasons why both the studio and the creators of the film might have chosen to do this. One reason might be because it was felt that they just couldn't justify the price of a feature film with a film that was less than an hour in length, and that selling it for less wouldn't pay for the cost of making it. I get this. I understand the economics involved. But I know that if they had just adapted The Killing Joke itself, I would not have balked at the price. And I believe that fans of the graphic novel would have ponied up the money too. And if Warner Brothers Animation and the film's creators wanted to give the fans more value for the money, they could have included Barbara's story as a bonus featurette on the Blu-ray DVD release, along with the other bonus features they were planning on releasing it with. Another reason for adding this extra story to the beginning might be because they wanted audience to care more about Barbara Gordon before the Joker shoots her and cripples her for life in the actual Killing Joke story. Also, the studio and or the film's creators might have felt that this extra story tacked on to the beginning was a way to give non-comic fans some history with Batgirl first before launching into the events of The Killing Joke. And while these might have been rationales used by the studio and the film creators, I personally don't believe that either of these rationales pan out. Non-comic book fans are not the audience for this film. The audience for this film is fans of the graphic novel, and The Killing Joke is one of the most widely read graphic novels ever. The fans of the original comic are already familiar with who Barbara Gordon / Batgirl is. They already do care about her. Alan Moore wrote this story already relying on your past familiarity with the Batman mythos before you read it. In fact, the Killing Joke graphic novel also requires, to some extent, that you have also read Frank Miller's The Dark Knight Returns, the other seminal Batman story published in the 80s, which at the time was published just prior to The Killing Joke. There is a line in the comic that is repeated in the film where Batman tells the Joker that one day there will be a final confrontation between them. That final confrontation was told in The Dark Knight Returns, and Alan Moore is clearly making reference to that previously published story in The Killing Joke as a kind of comic book version of the musical motif that musicians refer to as the call-out answer. The Killing Joke also assumes that you have read a well-known Batman story from 1951 entitled The Man Behind the Red Hood, which was the earliest origin of the Joker character ever published. In this story, we get a very simple origin of the Joker, having been known previously as a criminal called the Red Hood, a criminal that Batman pursued in a chemical factory until he fell into a vat of chemicals that created his clown-like appearance. And while a non-comic book audience can read the original comic book without any of the backstory that I have mentioned, the real audience for this film is the comic fans who know the Batman mythos. The non-comic fan is the supplementary audience. So let's move past Barbara's story and discuss the actual adaptation of The Killing Joke. It's mostly pretty good, but there are two areas where it fails. Now, I want to say that I am not one of these comic fans who feels that you must stay as close to the source material as possible in order for your adaptation to be good. But the film's creators are clearly trying their best to remain as faithful to Alan Moore and Brian Boland's original story. The Killing Joke comic is already very cinematic in how its words and pictures read already, so you can follow it fairly closely when adapting it to film. A few minor changes are made here and there to help the pacing when adapting from comic to screen. Instead of the Doctor telling us that Barbara Gordon will never walk again after being attacked by the Joker, we just see him poking a small, sharp object into her foot, trying to see if her nerves will react. There is another scene during the final chase between Batman and the Joker. The Joker is lecturing Batman on what a sick joke life is, and they are in a room where everything is upside down. It's a great little touch, and it isn't in the original story, and it works perfectly. But two areas that don't work so well also come near the film's climax. In the original story, and in the film, the Joker wants to prove that everyone is just one bad day away from becoming him. This theme was borrowed and adapted by filmmaker Christopher Nolan in his film The Dark Knight. But Alan Moore was the first to portray this theme with the Joker. He tries to drive Commissioner Gordon insane by shooting his daughter, Barbara Gordon, right in front of him, then kidnapping him and forcing him to look at pictures of his injured daughter in a state of undress. Then he begins to sing a song about going mad. In the comic, this song is just lines on a page. They rhyme, but there is no music, and the images of Gordon and the Joker are frighteningly juxtaposed from each other. In the film, I feel that they chose to be literally too faithful to the source material of the book, and the Joker sings and dances to a fully scored musical number. Objectively speaking, the song is well written and well performed by Mark Hamill. And yes, there is one panel in the book where you do see the Joker dancing as he sings this song. But there are some things that work fine on a comic page that don't necessarily work well when translated to film. Maybe it's because I am a musician, but I couldn't help but feel that I was out of the movie during the scene as I wondered, when did the Joker hire a songwriter and musicians to write and professionally record this for him so that he could sing it to Gordon? It just doesn't work. It came off as comical during the screening that I sat through, and it trivializes the horrific events that have happened prior to this scene, and it trivializes the point of the entire story as well. Then there is the final ending scene. Even after all he's done, the Batman makes an attempt to tell the Joker that it doesn't need to be this way, that perhaps he can still be rehabilitated. The Joker looks at him sadly and says, "It's too late for me." He's right, of course. No sane man could ever live with the horrors they have committed if they were the Joker. Then he tells Batman a joke about two men in an insane asylum who decide to escape. The two characters in this joke are symbolic of Batman and the Joker. The one who is able to jump off the rooftop of the asylum to the nearest rooftop to freedom is Batman. The one who is afraid to is the Joker. The Joker delivers the punchline, which I won't repeat here, and he begins to laugh at his own joke, slowly at first, and then uncontrollably. Then the really scary thing starts to happen, and Batman begins to laugh too. In any other Batman story, he would have stayed stoic, grabbed the Joker by the collar, and started to walk him to the police cars that are approaching during this scene. But in The Killing Joke, he first chuckles, and before long, he is laughing as uncontrollably as the Joker. The point of view in the comic pans down to the rain-drenched ground as they keep laughing, while the police sirens approach them. This scene alone is frightening enough, but even more frightening is we never know what happened when the police arrived. What did they make of these two enemies laughing hysterically with each other? Had Batman finally lost it? Was this the last Batman story? Some fans have theorized that while the camera pans down, Batman kills the Joker, and that this is the last Joker story, and the last Batman story as well. In the film, this scene is well portrayed and well acted, but it is cut off too soon. We get to the Joker's punchline. The laughter builds slowly between the two of them, but it never reaches the frightening, hysterical pitch that it does in the book. It is instead cut off by the closing credits. And this is perhaps the film adaptation's greatest failing. This adaptation needed to linger on the scene just a little bit longer. We needed tight close-ups of the Joker and Batman laughing maniacally at each other. We needed to hear the sound of the police sirens approaching, building underneath that laughter. And then when we do cut to black, we needed to uncomfortably stay there before the end credits start to crawl. This film tries heroically to stay faithful to its source material. It reaches to be as scary as the book's ending, but it doesn't reach far enough. Then there is the after-credit scene. I don't think that Alan Moore ever intended for this story to be anything but a one-shot story that took place outside of the regular Batman comics continuity. But the story became so huge that its events did affect continuity. Barbara Gordon remained crippled, but she moved on and became Batman's aide in the cyber world under the codename of Oracle. The post-credits scene portrays this transformation of Barbara Gordon. It's meant to give us a positive spin on the horror of the original story. But The Killing Joke is a horror story. Having Barbara Gordon become Oracle is another story for another time. Having the scene at the end trivializes Alan Moore's original intent. I will end this commentary with the following. Before writing this commentary, I had the chance to talk to a friend who saw this film at a Fathom Events screening also. He had never read the original story and walked in as a clean slate. He enjoyed the film and thought it was awesome. I am glad that he enjoyed the film, and I did enjoy certain aspects of it too. If you have read the book, but haven't seen this film adaptation yet, you will probably still want to see it, if for no other reason than to see how it plays for you. If you can separate the opening Barbara story and the post-credit scene, you get a mostly faithful adaptation of the book. But even with those scenes removed, the ending fails at being as terrifying as its source material by cutting out too early. This scene should have been as terrifying as the scene in Mulholland Drive when Diane is chased by the senior citizens. By failing in this closing scene, it fails in everything that precedes it. This is TJR. Thank you so much for watching. Please subscribe to the channel. And if you watch this film, please tell me what you thought. I'll be curious to read your comments. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.